you all to the Pennsylvania State House. Yeah, I did just call this building that, and not Independence Hall. And there's a good reason why I did that. It's because that's what this building was originally known as. Nobody called this building Independence Hall until the 1820s. It's originally known as the Pennsylvania State House. So if you had a time machine and you went back to, say, the 1770s, you asked George Washington or John Adams or Thomas Jefferson for directions to Independence Hall, you were going to get met with a blank, confused look. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never heard of a place called Independence Hall. I want you all to see if you can figure out why this building was originally known as the Pennsylvania State House. In order to do that, I want you to look around this space, take a look at the objects, the furnishings, the layout of this room that we're in right now. Anybody want to take a guess, using all of that information as clues? What do you think the original purpose of this space was?
Legislation?
Not quite. If you think of legislature, that's what that room over there is actually about. This room, though.
Courtroom?
Courtroom, exactly. This is a courtroom.
God,
this is where the Pennsylvania High Court met. This is basically the Supreme Court for the colony of Pennsylvania. This is the judicial branch of Pennsylvania's colonial government, located in this room right here. Across the way, where we're going in a few minutes, that's where the Pennsylvania Assembly met. That's your legislative branch. Right. And then upstairs, you've got the governor's office, so the executive branch. So judicial, legislative, executive, all three branches inside one building, hence the Pennsylvania State House. Like I said, nobody calls it Independence Hall until the 1820s. Now, this building started construction in 1732. It's the same year that George Washington is born. It is built in a style of architecture that is known as Georgian. Hey, folks, hey, can you please be quiet? Like I said, you think you're whispering, it's distracting everybody. All right, thank you, appreciate it. Now, like I said, it's built in a style of architecture that is known as Georgian. Georgian architecture really emphasizes balance and symmetry. If you had a giant razor, you could essentially cut this building in half from that door over there down to that door over there. You'd end up with two almost completely symmetrical halves. I could keep going on about the architectural history of this building, but I'm fairly certain that's not what most of you came here today to learn about. I'm pretty sure you're more interested in what actually took place inside this building. More specifically, two very pivotal parts of the American Revolution, namely the Second Continental Congress and the Constitutional Convention. Both of those took place primarily in that room over there. So we're starting over here, you might ask, why? Well, I'm going to answer your question with another question. And that is, to you, what was the American Revolution about? In one or two words, just sum it up. Freedom? Okay, I like it. Anybody else?
Pursuit of happiness?
Pursuit of happiness, that's a great one. Anybody else? Taxation. Usually, almost always, about 99% of the time, within three answers, sometimes the first answer, we get to taxation. And, of course, people focus on that issue of taxation a lot, right? There's that famous phrase, no taxation without representation, right? A lot of people think the American Revolution was all about taxes. And yes, in a way, it was about taxes. But it's about a whole lot of other things as well. Who here has read the Declaration of Independence before? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, those of you not raising your hand, I'm going to give you a real quick summary of what the Declaration of Independence actually is. It's a list of reasons why these colonies are separating themselves from the rest of the British Empire after more than a year of fighting already. So remember, the American Revolutionary War starts in 1775. We don't declare independence until July of 1776. That list of reasons, there's 27 of them in the Declaration. Out of those 27 reasons, do you know how many actually mention the word taxes? One out of 27. There's 26 other reasons in there that don't have anything to do with taxes, but they are important. And I always like to emphasize that, especially when we talk about the founding generation. A lot of times, when we're talking about the American Revolution, we use the term founders or founding fathers. We don't really like using that term because it excludes the 99.9% of people who participated in the revolution, whose names don't appear in our textbooks. But they're important because they're much more akin to what our experiences of the revolution would have been had we been alive at that time. And there's one person in particular I want to talk about who I think really encapsulates how much the American Revolution was about so much more than just taxes. And that is, I want to talk about a boy by the name of James Forten. See, on the 8th of July of 1776, we have the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence. It takes place right out there in the square you were all waiting for this for. A crowd of a few thousand people is gathered on the square there, and they're hearing the words of the Declaration of Independence for the very first time. Amongst that crowd is a young boy by the name of James Forten. He is 11 years old at this time. Now, Forten comes from a poor working-class black family that lives on the banks of the Delaware River. Forten's grandfather was born an enslaved man, but his father was born free. His father also died when Forten was very, very young. So Forten, between the fact that he has to go to start working at a very young age to support his family, and the fact that he is black, means that despite being incredibly intelligent, he has virtually no formal education. But he is in that crowd of a few thousand people. He hears the Declaration of Independence read out, and he is so inspired that a little while later, he enlists aboard a privateer. If you don't know what a privateer is, it's basically like a legalized pirate. They have permission from the Continental Congress to go out and attack British shipping in order to help the war effort. They're successful at this for a little while until a Royal Navy frigate comes over the horizon and puts a quick end to their privateering career. A lot of Forten's crew members are killed. He is fortunate enough to be captured alive. Now, like I said, he doesn't have much formal education, virtually none, but he is incredibly intelligent. And the captain of that British frigate recognizes that. He makes Forten an offer. He says, I'll take you back to Britain with me. I'll ensure that you get a proper education as befitting your intelligence, one that was been denied to you because of the color of your skin. And all you have to do is promise that you won't be involved in this revolutionary nonsense anymore. So I'm going to ask you all right now, do you think that James Forten took that deal? Raise your hand if you think he did. Raise your hand if you think he did not take that deal. Yeah. Yeah, well, you're right. But yeah, I mean, for a 14-year-old, which is the age that he was, I think his response was incredibly on point. He says, I have been made a prisoner for my country's interests. I will not be made a traitor to her liberties. I could not come up with a line like that at the age of 14. He is then put onto a prison hulk, essentially a decommissioned ship floating in New York Harbor, where he stays there for months as a prisoner of war before he walks by himself all the way back to Philadelphia. Now, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a 14-year-old. For some of us, that might be a little easier, might have been a little more recently. For some of us, it's a little further back in the past. But nevertheless, when you were 14 years old, would you be willing to go out and fight in a war because some of the adults in your life were complaining about taxes? I don't think you would. I know I certainly wouldn't have. I'm willing to bet that Forten was more motivated by like what you brought up, for example, the pursuit of happiness and freedom. And yes, taxation is very definitely part of it. It's wrapped up with ideas of liberty and freedom. But the point I'm making here is that the American Revolution is a much larger struggle than just the battles and the famous names that we focus on. So much of the American Revolution is fought in places like this, courtrooms, and legislatures, as well as battlefields. That's why we start over here, so we get that proper context and understanding to what the American Revolution really was. There's the American Revolutionary War. It's 8 years long. It's nestled in a much bigger period of social and political and cultural and religious and economic upheaval and change. That's what we can see on display here. Now, we're going to head over there in just a moment, but before we do, anybody have any questions about this space you just dying to know the answer to before we go on over to the room where the United States of America was actually born? Yeah.
How many trials were conducted in this room?
Yeah, this would have been both the courtroom for the Pennsylvania High Court, so they're dealing with major cases, but this is also where you'd be having cases that would be just sort of everyday run-of-the-mill cases, both civil and criminal. So, for example, you could find cases being tried here to do with murder or charges of rape or something like that, all the way to somebody's just suing somebody else over, a property dispute.
And there were 4 Supreme Court?
Not always. So we have 4 seats up there because that's usually what the Pennsylvania High Court went with, but they would have varying numbers of judges depending on the court we're talking about and the case we're talking about. But it was almost always multiple judges. Very rare to have just one judge. All right, well, let's head on over to the Pennsylvania Assembly Room then, shall we? Go see the room we all came to check out. Grab any photographs you want of this space, because we're not coming back. Follow me.
Beautiful building. I've always loved Georgian architecture.
Hi.
Howdy, sir. Here we are.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Pennsylvania Assembly Room. If you're gonna say the United States of America is born in one place, this is it. This is that place. So I'm gonna stand over here for about 7 seconds so you can get some photographs of this space that don't have to be here. Use this opportunity while it's here. This is where we get all 13 colonies and their representatives gathering in May of 1775, just a few weeks after the American Revolutionary War has already begun. April 19th, 1775 is the first battle of the American Revolutionary War. It's the Battle of Lexington and Concord up in Massachusetts. At the end of that day, there's an army of New England militiamen laying siege to the city of Boston. The British army is trapped inside. And we have now begun a war that, like I said, will last for 8 years, though nobody knows that at this time. A few weeks after that war begins, we get all the delegates arriving into this room. It's what we now call the Second Continental Congress. The First Continental Congress had taken place the year before, in 1774, about a block and a half down the road at Carpenter's Hall. Now, this Second Continental Congress is going to be much longer than the first one. It's going to have to deal with a lot more crises. A lot of those crises are going to come right in the very first half, the first part of the war. Like I said, the war starts in April of 1775. It's not until we get to July of 1776, however, that we end up declaring independence. It's because the war doesn't start without independence, not for most people anyway. And that makes sense when you think about it, right? We're British. We like being British. We're fighting this entire thing to begin with over our rights as British subjects, rights we are guaranteed by the British Constitution. It's going to take a major change to get enough people to divorce themselves from the idea of being British and instead embracing a different identity, an American identity. That does not happen overnight. It takes a long time. But eventually, the resistance to declaring independence, and believe me, there is a lot of resistance within this Congress to declaring independence. But eventually it is overcome on the 4th of July, 1776, the Declaration of Independence gets its final approval inside this room on that day. Hence why we still celebrate it as Independence Day. Here's the thing though, the Declaration is not signed on that day. It is not signed for another month. Not until August 2nd, 1776. I mean, if you go to the National Archives down in Washington, D.C., and you go see that handwritten and signed copy of the Declaration, it looks like this. It is very badly faded. You cannot read most of it anymore. We have the contrast on this one, so you need a better look at it. You got the signatures on it. You got John Hancock's bigger than everybody else's. Nicolas Cage stole it in that movie I'm not going to mention the name of, because I don't like it. When you look at this, this is not the original Declaration of Independence. This is not the first one. This is a handwritten copy with signatures on it that came into existence a month after these existed by the hundreds. Declaration of Independence was printed hundreds and hundreds of times first, and then it is later handwritten and signed. If you were alive in 1776, that's how you saw the Declaration of Independence. I can guarantee you right now you would have never, ever, ever seen the one signed copy. It stayed in a locked box with the Congress. It's meant for the men who signed it, nobody else. It doesn't go on public display until the 1820s. These, however, this is what the rest of the world sees. This is mass communication in the 18th century. This is what makes revolution possible. But declaring independence means nothing. Absolutely nothing. If you can't win a war to back it up. And we're going to have to fight that war for another 7 years until we finally secure our independence in 1783. But that's all we do in 1783. We secure our independence. We do not create a nation in 1783. What comes out of the Treaty of Paris in 1783 are 13 disparate little republics that are barely tied together. There's something known as the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation, perpetual union, if you want to get their full fancy title. Perpetual, forever, right? We used the Articles for less than 8 years. The Articles don't work. Under the Articles of Confederation, the national government had one and only one power. That was the power to declare war. That's it. But in addition to soldiers, guns, ships, what do you need to fight a war? Money, lots of it. Wars are incredibly expensive. National government, under the Articles of Confederation, can't tax anyone. So good luck raising money to fight that war you just declared. They can't stop the states from printing their own currency. Imagine you had 13 different kinds of money floating around. Can't stop the states from erecting trade and travel restrictions with each other. The national government has no military power to put down the armed rebellions that are breaking out, like Shays' Rebellion up in Massachusetts. In fact, under the Articles, the national government is so weak, so powerless, so ineffectual, it can't stop the states from going to war with each other. Pennsylvania and Connecticut fought a war with each other in the 1780s. Did y'all know that? Yeah, it's called the Pennamite-Yankee War. So we have gone from one situation in the 1760s, there's too much government, as many people saw it, resulting in tyranny, to now 20 years later, we have the opposite problem. It's a lack of governments. We have not created a nation. Like I said, we've created 13 disparate little republics, and we're starting to realize we didn't like each other as colonies that much. During the Revolution, we had at least a common enemy to work against. But now, after we've gotten our independence, we're starting to realize, oh, why? We don't like each other as states either. Something has to be done about this. This is a crisis. People are dying over this in the 1780s. European and other foreign powers are circling us like sharks, ready to pick off individual states. And so in the summer of 1787, we get another gathering inside this room. It's what we now call the Constitutional Convention. Overseeing it is the man sitting in that chair right there, George Washington. It's probably the only man who could be agreed upon to sit in that chair and oversee this convention. Benjamin Franklin was here as well, however, along with a lot of other famous people. And Franklin was looking at that chair and he's thinking to himself, is that a rising or a setting sun? Should we be optimistic or pessimistic about where this is going? I'm going to show you that design. You can make up your own mind. But there is a lot of room for pessimism and worry here, because this convention is arguing over and debating questions as fundamental as how are we going to structure Congress, how many presidents are we going to have at a time, how long are those presidents going to serve for, who's going to vote for the president, and even things that are beyond direct government structure. Questions that are as important as should slavery be abolished. That is debated inside this room in the summer of 1787. It's highly miracle that on September 17th, 1787, 39 of those delegates put their signatures to a constitution right here. We still use that constitution today, well over 200 years later. Because I think that Franklin probably got it right. He decided ultimately that's a rising, not a setting sun on that chair. But that doesn't mean the history and the importance and the relevance of this building just stops in 1787. And to illustrate how those ideals expressed within this room get carried forward to future generations of Americans, there's just a few more stories I want to tell you before I let you go. The first is about the 2 times that Abraham Lincoln came to visit Independence Hall. The first was in 1861. Very early 1861. He is on his way down to Washington, D.C. to be sworn in as president. He's already won the election of 1860, which means this country is already barreling towards a civil war. States like South Carolina have already begun to secede from the Union. And Lincoln delivers a speech where he says he would rather be shot down in cold blood than allow for the Union created inside this room to be torn apart. So it's somewhat poignant that the second time that Abraham Lincoln comes to visit is in 1865, after he has already been murdered in cold blood to preserve that union created inside this room. His body is on a special train being carried back to Illinois for burial, but it's stopping at various cities along the way so that Americans can pay their respects to the great emancipator. Lincoln's body lies in state right here for less than 20 hours. And in that space, more than 100,000 people file through here. They take out those 2 windows and those 2 windows. They build temporary wooden stairs to accommodate the flow of traffic. All these people saying goodbye to the great emancipator and the ideals that he died to protect. In this room right here. The other time I want to talk about is a few years later in 1876. This is the centennial, the 100th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It's kind of a big deal, as you can imagine. Lots of events and speeches and things like that are happening in the square right out here on the 4th of July of 1876. And amongst that crowd gathered there is an activist by the name of Susan B. Anthony. She has a document that she wants to read out from the main bandstand out there. So she starts marching towards that bandstand, but then she is blocked by the mayor of Philadelphia and some other officials. And they say, no, we're not allowing you to speak. Go home, pretty little lady. So you think Susan B. Anthony just turned around and went home, right? No, absolutely not. She barged her way onto that bandstand, onto that stage, and she read out a Declaration of Rights of Women. She said, you got it half right 100 years ago in 1776 when you said all men are created equal. But what about the other half of humanity? And then the third and final one I want to talk about is what happened in 1963 and 1965. Those were the two sit-ins that took place right out in the hall, right in that space where we just walked in when we entered this building. That time, the Liberty Bell was actually on display inside that space. And in 1963 and 1965, dozens and dozens of young people who are fighting for their rights and the rights of all Americans, regardless of the color of their skin, hold sit-ins over there to protest the murders of Christian pastors and others in the South, in Alabama, who were down there fighting for the rights of Black Americans. Rights that were talked about right inside this room here. So there's plenty of other stories I could tell you, but I think I'm going to leave it there because that really, I think, encapsulates the point I'm trying to make here. The ideals of the American Revolution were not invented by the American Revolution. They already existed, but they didn't stop with the American Revolution either. Continue forward through every generation of Americans. And I hope you leave this place today thinking about how you can help carry forward those ideas to your generation, and the next, and the next. Even if you're not American. This doesn't apply just to Americans, it applies to the entire world. All right, anybody got any quick questions before we close on tonight? Anything back here catching your fancy and you just want to know about it a bit more?
Are there famous chairs where people?
Not really, no. That only famous chairs. That one right up there, the Rising Sun chair. All these other chairs, they are historical pieces. They are from the 1700s. They're just not necessarily originals to this building.
So Benjamin Franklin didn't tend to sit there, or?
Yeah, well, this is where the Pennsylvania delegation roughly sat, and so he would have probably sat over there. But Franklin was also very, very old by the time the Constitutional Convention is taking place. He is so old, he's suffering from gout, he cannot walk, so he actually has to be carried each session to Independence Hall from his house in a sedan chair by two prisoners of the city jail.
Where would Madison sit?
Again, Madison would have been sitting with the Virginia delegation, that table right over there, roughly, but again, you know, we're talking people moved around, things like that.
Where was the Massachusetts delegation sitting?
Right in there, far table right there.
Yeah, that makes sense. My dad and I are from Mass, so we were just central, near
Okay.
Worcester.
My wife and I are not originally from New England. I'm from Australia and Canada, or Australia and California. She's from Indiana, but we became accidental New Englanders. We lived in and around Boston for about 10 years. Can't wait
I've
to
lived
get back.
I've lived in Massachusetts for 20.
Alrighty, folks. So, we're going to mosey on out here. I'm going to lead us out to the north. I'll hang out over there in case anybody else has got any other questions.